This podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello and welcome to Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations, the show that aims to elevate the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. I'm your host Paul, and today I'm so excited to welcome Eitan Gallant, big-time cannabis enthusiast, experienced in both the legacy and legal markets in Canada, and is currently head of education for Decibel, who are a Canadian licensed producer with brands including Quest and General Admission. We cover so much in this episode as Eitan talks about his experience being raided by the police and arrested for working in a medical cannabis clinic. We talk about why THC percentage ain't all it's cracked up to be, why dry herb vaping is pretty cool and accidentally connoisseur, the entourage effect, and a bunch of other cool stuff. So if you like what you hear, make sure you give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform of choice and follow us on Instagram at Give and Toke. For now, please enjoy the show. It's awesome to have you here, man. You and I became very dear friends during my time in Canada, and we've managed to stay in touch, both continuing our respective journeys on the other side of the world and able to come together today to just share some of our passion. And, I really want to tap into that glee and enthusiasm that you have for cannabis.
I appreciate that, my friend. Obviously, we've been through the ringer together. We've, seen this industry, this legalized industry here in Canada develop, and always great to connect and reconnect.
You and I go way back. We both sold weed during a pandemic, which is a pretty kind of bonding experience. I have great knowledge and understanding of what you do and where your passion lies, and that's why I've got you here today. So in a nutshell, what is it you do in the cannabis industry?
Ooh, okay. I love it. It feels like a big question. It feels like a big answer. So I've obviously been through a bunch of different places, but where I am right now is I am the effectively national educator for a licensed cannabis producer here in Canada, Decibel, as you said. My title is head of education. So I effectively get to design our education curriculum, any new products that are coming to market soon. I train the rest of my sales team, the rest of the company on the technical specs and details, and of course creating educational content. And effectively, I'd say most of my job is conducting product knowledge and brand education sessions for bud tenders and other retailers across the country.
I think brand rep can be a bit of a dirty word sometimes, and particularly in cannabis. I think there's a lot of cannabis enthusiasts. They want the authenticity from the people that are selling it to them and that are working for brands. And that's something that always stood out to me about you, man. You live and breathe cannabis. When you present something to me or to other people, it's because you stand by it. It's not just because that's the one you're selling. It's what you believe in. So where did this personal passion develop? Where did this joy, this love for the plant that you've been able to bring into the industry, to bring into brands? To me, man, it's all you. Where did this come from?
Yeah, oh, dude, I love the question. And, you started by asking kind of like, where does the love of the plant and all that? And I would argue that, before the plant, this like mechanism, the way that I talk, the way that I interact with people, this world is fucked up. There's a lot of bullshit in this world. There's a lot of pain in this world. And, from my own pain, I'm sure growing up when I was a kid, I'm sure I developed some kind of mechanism to be friendly with people, right? I was often a little bit of a class clown and loved to like joke and just really love to make people laugh and like to make people's hearts warm. So as I progressed into whatever professional world, and now it is cannabis, it was renewable energy formerly, this was always my style, was really, the element, the art of connecting with people first. And then I was never much of a salesperson. I feel like if I'm coming through genuinely, passionately, positively, honestly, those elements just translate, and that makes me quote unquote a good salesperson. But really, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to be a good dude and trying to spread the love that I can spread to my people.
So where did your personal relationship with cannabis develop? I remember you speaking to me a while ago about what you discovered with kind of self-medication in a way for migraines and things like that. So how did you find cannabis, and when did you also find the kind of apex of what it's used for? So many people discover it when they're younger, use it recreationally, have a puff during high school, get a little silly, whatever. But then, here we are as adults still doing this all these years on. Where did this foundation form for you?
So originally I would have started in that recreational mind state. My older brothers, one of them has now passed, so I'm living every day repping this plant in his honor. But with that said, when I first got into it, it was like a puff from my brother's joint because it was cool and it smelled interesting and they seemed to have a good time on it. Very quickly thereafter, as you mentioned, I found the therapeutic use of it for me. I had a bad eye injury. I developed this bad pressure in the eye, migraines ensued, all sorts of other discomfort. And I found that, this plant that I had already started to enjoy recreationally for fun with my friends, if I took a puff when that migraine was starting to develop, it nipped that migraine in the bud, pun intended, and it would just dissipate it entirely. I found this use of the plant aside from it still brought me joy, it still made me happy, but I found that it let me live a better life, right? A life freer of pain and freer from discomfort than I had before.
At that stage, were you getting any guidance about how to use that as a form of medicine? Was there any particular strain someone went, hey, this might help with a migraine? Or did you just kind of have to figure that out for yourself?
I love the question, and I think you already know the answer. This would have been, a bunch of years ago when, no, it was like, here's this bag of cannabis. Did I even know at the time what a strain was, or what like a cultivar was, or what a different, a terpene profile was unheard of to me at the time. So it was this green, skunky, floral smelling plant, and I would roll a little joint or put a little ground flower into a pipe, take a puff, and like, boop, my migraine was gone. That's the extent of my, the guidance that I had was fully self-taught, I want to say.
It's really interesting because I feel that so many people try cannabis one or two times and have a negative experience. My mum, who's very pro alternative medicine, for example, just can't really reconcile with cannabis because of like an experience she had in the 1970s. So I think it's great that you persevered. Do you find people have that kind of resistance? Do you come across people like that? Like, I don't believe that cannabis is for everyone, but when people are trying to treat themselves, what would your advice be? Because we can get medical. I'm a medical patient in Australia. Canadians can access medical, but I'm sure most people are just going to a store and trying to figure it out themselves. What's your advice or guidance for those people trying to find a solution for an ailment like that?
So obviously right now, there has been a lot of research. There's a lot of literature out there. Mostly, a lot of it is anecdotal, but there are places that you can find references for, people that have used cannabis in one form or another, whether it's inhaling, whether it's ingesting, etc., for some kind of specific ailment, some specific symptom relief. So that's a good platform to start. But I don't want to scare anybody away, but I would say trial and error. Experimentation is probably the name of the game. And if I could offer any piece of support, especially for someone who's like willing to go through maybe a few negative experiences to find something that works for them, is journal. Write down what it is that you're trying to treat for yourself. Write down, the options that the bud tender has given you or things that you found on the internet. Ask the relevant questions, and then be prepared to potentially have a couple of experiences where nothing happens and the pain, persists, or where too much happens and you get into an anxious spiral, whatever the case may be. Go through those trials and tribulations. And for most people that I've met, that I've talked to, they eventually find something that does work for them.
That's great advice. I think there needs to be a willingness for that trial and error, for things to not work immediately the first time. I do recall, particularly in the early days of legalization, certainly some older customers coming in wanting like an oil for sleep or something, it not working on the first night and then being furious that legalization even happened. We're patient with a lot of other things. I think back to drinking, for example. I had so many negative experiences with drinking as a teenager, binge drinking, over drinking, vomiting, ruining someone else's night. but you keep trying, you keep doing it. It's never specifically or exclusively the booze that was at fault, but I do find a lot of people will instantly kind of go, oh no, that joint made me sleepy, or it made me paranoid that one time, not going to go there again. So I think it is good for people to be prepared for a bit of trial and error.
I love the analogy of, I often, when I'm consulting, when I'm talking to people, there are different products where I will kind of compare to alcohol. One is your boutique winery wine that you're saving for a special occasion. The other one is your cheap, liter and a half bottle that you'll open on a Tuesday night, whatever. It's cheaper. It doesn't really matter. But it's such a funny analogy because you just said it. Most people that I've talked to have had infinite number of negative alcohol related experiences, and yet most people, nothing but love, with all due respect, most people do continue to drink past that, whereas a few people that I know that are like, I'm off cannabis, what's the line that I heard recently? I've had a bunch of people tell me that they're allergic to cannabis, and again, with all due respect, it's very possible. Some people can have regular negative experiences, but from my understanding, from what I know about, the science of it, it's less likely that, they are actually allergic to cannabis, and more likely the set and the setting was wrong. They were in a weird place that they weren't familiar with. They had too much. Often it's related to an edible where, the dosing isn't always as easy to navigate. And now you find yourself in this scary, nauseous, uncomfortable place. And now you're quote unquote allergic and never want to do it again. Whereas you've been nauseous many, many times drinking on a night out, and here you're back for more, next weekend.
Allergic to cannabis. I've never heard that expression, and I maybe because I'm allergic to bullshit, but that's something else right there. Allergic to cannabis. I mean, I guess in all due respect, people do have negative reactions that are legitimate, but like you said, it's kind of, have the other possibilities been evaluated? And even that point you made about edibles is interesting. Like, I would consider myself an experienced cannabis user, a competent cannabis user, mindful cannabis user. And after all these years, I still can't cope with the impact of edibles, the delayed onset, the length of time they remain, and then kind of what you're stuck with. So I think it's really interesting how many people tiptoe into cannabis with edibles, given that many, many experienced people are like, hell no, man, they don't work for me.
Completely. And we now know a lot more about like what edibles do to your body. And it's a whole different, process of absorption compared to inhaling it. So you're right. There are elements where it'll take longer to take effect. The duration is a little bit longer. I'd argue it's a more challenging form of consumption to dial in, right? Like smoking, inhaling, it happens very quickly. And now, okay, that was too much, or it's not enough, or what have you. Whereas edibles, you're, an hour later, you're like, oh, I don't think it was quite enough. And you take a little bit more and it's like a shitty experience. And yet you're right. That's often people's first introduction to cannabis at all, is eating something that their friend made in their kitchen and they don't know how to dose it properly.
No wonder they run for the hills. That is so true. The amount of people that do disclose to me that, oh yeah, I had these brownies once and I had 6 because the first one didn't do anything. And then I was in bed for 3 days and, questioning my entire existence. So yeah, fair enough, people. Go low and slow. Every bud tender says it. And I think that's way easier with a joint. Have a puff, wait and see. Because for me even, the effects of inhalation have worn off before an edible will have kicked in. It's about control for me. And so that's definitely some advice for the newbies, is steer clear of the edibles, even if they sound delicious.
And you know what, to be honest, the right time and right place for all of it. I'm more of an inhalation consumer. I specifically like to smoke joints. I do like my dry herb vaporizing for a whole other level of reasons that we can talk about later. But joints has always just been my go-to. Whereas as I'm starting to learn more about myself and ingesting form of consumption that is edibles, I'm actually seeing that I really like that for a social context. Me personally, smoking, not the hugest fan of like interacting with a big group of people, especially a group of people that I'm not familiar with. It's immediate. I take a puff and now it's a whole different kind of mindset. Whereas I find with edibles, I can eat an edible, go hang out with new people, and it kicks in so slowly that it gives me and my body and my mind this opportunity to almost like acclimatize to this new setting, if that makes sense.
That's a man who's figured out a controlled dose, who's figured out what works for them. And I'm proud of you, man.
Thanks, buddy. Of course, I do it for you.
Let's not wait to talk about the dry herb vape then, because what you may not be aware is that in Australia, that's actually the only legal way we're supposed to be consuming our flower. So on the medical market, our dosage, our kind of what's written on our prescription is based on dry herb inhalation. Technically, it would be illegal for me to smoke my cannabis in joint form, in combustion. So let's actually talk about dry herb vapes, because I don't think everyone knows what they are. It's the kind of primary method for medical cannabis here. Why is it that you enjoy the dry herb vape so much?
That's so interesting, by the way, about Australia. I did not know that at all. So thanks for teaching me. I got to be honest, I'm a little bit proud of that. I feel like there's something really beautiful about vaporizing dry flower as opposed to smoking it, combusting it. I would argue that when you're combusting it, often for myself, for a lot of people that I've interacted with, they feel it more. So when you're smoking a joint, people say like, oh, I felt the joint, whereas I don't really feel anything when I vape, when I dry herb vape. And part of the reason is my thought, the research I've done, the reading I've done, you're inhaling combusted plant matter. There's an element now of oxygen deprivation that is giving you this fogginess, that's giving you this added level of intoxication. To be completely honest, you are literally losing the majority of cannabinoids and terpenes. You're burning them off. I think the remaining amount that you're inhaling is close to 15% of the original cannabinoids and terpenes and other, phytochemicals and whatnot. Whereas when you're dry herb vaporizing, you are inhaling, you're saving closer to 80% of them. So it's a much lower temperature. Obviously, you are not combusting it. You're not engulfing it in fire. It is heating it up slowly to a certain temperature. And most, especially the really nice, premium, more expensive dry herb vapes, you can dial in the temperature so specifically that we can get into a whole other level of conversation. And that's like, okay, which terpene am I trying to feel and isolate first? Because this terp vaporizes at 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and this one is at 325 degrees Fahrenheit, et cetera, and the list goes on.
It certainly seems to me as almost like an accidentally connoisseur way of the medical cannabis field approaching cannabis. Like, obviously they've gone the healthier route, but long term, it's going to create a greater appreciation for the plant, its effects, its cannabinoids, its flavonoids, its terpenes. So while it was purely a health decision, it's actually going to help people understand cannabis a little bit more, how it works and how it affects them. So it's definitely something I enjoy. Whenever I say to people that I use a vape, they kind of jump to the idea of like the nicotine vapes or the oil vapes, which have their place, but it is a completely different experience and a way less harmful experience or potentially harmful experience than combustion. We don't know all the facts yet. We don't have all the data, but I think even just with common sense at play, dry herb vape and the levels in which it's vaporizing rather than combusting has got to be better for your lungs.
Completely. And even talking about, as you said, the connoisseurship, especially for medical approach, thinking of what different strains or different cultivars might actually do for you. Again, back in the day, I got a bag of flour, I rolled it up, I smoked it. I actually lost, and I still do whenever I'm smoking, I'm losing some of the elements of that particular strain or cultivar's profile. Whereas when I'm vaporizing it, that entourage effect, that we know and love, the interaction of terpenes and cannabinoids and your personal endocannabinoid system, that entourage effect is much more present when you're dry herb vaporizing. So anyways, the long-term approach is beautiful that Australia has. I agree, you got to start somewhere. You can't put in a law and then remove it as easily as you can slowly build on the law. So they did what they had to do, and I don't disrespect it. Mind you, I like smoking joints, but I still don't disrespect the approach.
Me too, man. That's the exact thing. That's kind of, even the doctors prescribing are like, it's for vaporizing, but of course you're an adult in your own home and we can't tell you what to do. Just that language to kind of dance around the loophole, really. But you mentioned the entourage effect, and that's not about Turtle, Vinny Chase, and Ari Gold. What is the man? I don't know about you. Did you watch Entourage back in the day?
100%. What a great show. I love that show.
I loved it. It has aged terribly. Like I watch back now and I'm just like, oh my God, was I this sexist in my 20s? Apparently I was, but I've got some remorse now. But please explain to the listeners, what is the entourage effect?
I love that, dude. Hey, man, there's so much from the early 2000s, especially before that, but even from like the mid, from 2010s that have aged very poorly. And you're like, what? What happened to this movie that I used to know and love? And why is it so problematic? I mean, it was always problematic, but maybe we have a different lens to look at it now.
I thought Stifler was a feminist.
There you go. Exactly. Right. So that entourage effect, this is, a lot of people love to talk about their THC potency, and they think that that's the main intoxicant, the main thing impacting them. A lot of the research is showing that, this difference between strains or cultivars, I use the terms interchangeably. I think cultivar is technically a little bit more appropriate or valid than strain. But with that said, these strains, of course, have their cannabinoid profiles and their terpene profiles, along with some other phytochemicals. But those are the main ones that we're talking about. And then the way that, those terpenes interact with those cannabinoids is what affects you. Now, I love the additional layer. A lot of people say, like, the way that terpenes and THC, or the way that terpenes and cannabinoids interact with each other. The step further, and I'd argue a little bit more accurate, is the way that, cannabinoids and terpenes interact with my endocannabinoid system, with your endocannabinoid system. And that, to me, is really more specifically the entourage effect, because that, one strain or cultivar that I love and know and works for me, if you try it, you probably will not have the exact same experience that I do. And that's because of your endocannabinoid system. The cannabinoids and the terpene profile is the one and the same, but it's clearly impacting you differently. That's the entourage effect, because it's impacting your endocannabinoid system versus mine. So those people who do say, THC, and this is what it does for me, THC on its own has a very linear, limited, very simple kind of impact, at least on my body. Maybe it's different for others, but when it's like THC distilled, it has a very limited impact. When I'm, ingesting that or inhaling that, and it's now a combination of other terpenes and other elements of the profile, that's when the real, beauty of that particular product shines in my body, right? In my endocannabinoid system.
And I think I can assume that that's why you are a big fan of the whole flower, the whole plant, and kind of everything that's in it. Because, yeah, there is absolutely a market for distillate, particularly in the vape market. People like it. People enjoy it for various reasons. But there is so much more to the plant than just that compound that, Health Canada has created a monster with THC, with the regulations around what can be on the labeling of cannabis products. It's almost the only thing that really is different from product to product, given that the packaging looks so similar. That's the only thing that really changes, and it's kind of something that consumers cling on to. So it's good for them to get an understanding that it's everything that's in the plant that contributes to your experience. Like, it's why a 17% THC debubber is the best thing for me to sleep with, even despite 30% super heavy indicas existing. That debubber obviously has the entourage effect, that whole plant experience that aids in my sleep.
Yeah, man, I love that, and you have that personal experience, right? Like you've experimented and explored, and you found that about yourself. I remember fondly a particular product that my company has a few brands out in market, that we had a product way back in the day. It was hovering at a very low 15% THC. It was called Strawberry Cough. To me, it was absolutely immaculate. It tasted like strawberries. It worked for me. It made me arguably more intoxicated than most 25% THCs on the market. And yet the product arguably was a flop. It worked very well for a while, but when potency started increasing and getting to 18 and 19, and then honestly, the company that I work for eventually had a 30% THC product on the market, and it sold out. It sold out immediately. Whereas that lowly 15%, THC product got left by the wayside, even though for me, for many people that I know, if you really looked into the impact that it had on you, it worked better. It was a better product overall. F the THC potency. That to me, I don't need anything that high. I'm a bit of a lightweight in that regard, to be honest.
A little while ago, you shared on your Instagram a reflection about it when you worked in Guelph at a cannabis store in the legacy market. You shared an experience about that store being raided and your subsequent arrest, and that being a bit of a foundation for your time in the cannabis industry. Can we talk about that today? Talk about that experience of working there, experiencing a raid and being arrested.
I of course, dude, I love talking about it. I feel like it's such a big foundation of how I got into this, of how my career developed. Yeah, man, what a wild experience. Again, I had done a little bit of my own experimentation and learning about how cannabis therapeutically impacted me. And then through a whole series of strange events, I'll just back up a little bit. I was working at a used video rental store as a neighboring business to this medical model dispensary, affectionately called a compassion club, because the owners and operators were operating out of this compassionate approach because it was in a gray area of the law. But I was working at this used video rental store. There was a break and enter attempt on the neighboring business, on this medical dispensary. I was the one who ended up calling the police, and I met, the cop and the owner and the store manager outside, and, recounting, my statement, recounting what it was that I saw, why I called the police. And effectively, that was it. That's what kicked this all into gear. That interaction, that introduction. They told me, we're looking for a frontline clerk. Here's the application. Here's the website. And 2 weeks later, I was behind the counter, answering the phone. And eventually, I moved into the back room where I was actually consulting and dispensing the product itself, dispensing at the time the medicine itself.
That's pretty crazy, man. There's not many industries where your job interview would be a police statement.
Yeah, well said, eh?
That's pretty wild. So once you were in that role and you were working with people and really helping them, I'm sure you saw the benefits of cannabis. What was it like to operate in a gray area like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I remember being so proud. I remember knowing that, the store, the business that I was employed by was operating in this gray area. I knew, vaguely in the peripheral, the back of my mind, that there was some risk associated. But with that said, there was a Health Canada medical marijuana access regulations program in the works. It was already working and people were already accessing it. And there were a few gaps, and I literally felt like we were doing a service to patients, to people. And then I got to witness it. I got to meet and talk to people, and again, we called them patients at this particular business, that were dealing with some really life-shattering symptoms, some diagnoses and some symptoms, and hearing their stories, and then consulting and giving them medicine and having them come back a week later and telling me what that medicine did for them was still kind of like warms my heart to think of some of those people that were living the way that they were living, and that cannabis made such an absolutely big difference for them. So I do remember being very proud of the fact that it was slightly in the gray area, that I was doing something a little bit like, I'm going to use the word sketchy, but I didn't feel it was sketchy, but in the eyes of the law, a little bit risky, and yet I was doing something so helpful and powerful for the community.
We continue the streak on this show of all guests have taken some element of risk. There's different levels, but everyone has kind of taken a risk to engage in this industry, to proselytize it, to kind of share the benefits of it with people. We're at a risk every day of kind of alienating people, turning people off, affecting kind of employment opportunities and things like that. So it's definitely important, and it seems to come through often, that people are willing to take this risk, that it's worth it. So given that you were taking this risk and it led to a subsequent arrest, walk us through what, that day or that experience was like of being arrested for working in this industry.
So again, as I mentioned, I quite do like talking about it. I remember it not always being the case. It landed heavy for a while thereafter, and I felt arguably, I don't want to use the word lightly, but I felt quite traumatized by it. My whole view of the police shifted very quickly. I remember thinking beforehand, and probably naively so, that they were there for my safety and protection, and then I felt very differently literally the day after I got arrested. But that being said, I digress. The day itself was any other day at the shop. Went in the morning, opened up. We always closed for lunch, so I went home for lunch. I lived about a 3-minute walk away, and I would go home for lunch. Came back, And we also delivered to a few specific patients that lived out of town. We, put parcels in the mail, shipped them using Canada Post and directly to their doorstep. And we had a few parcels on the counter. And my job that day, I was literally, administrator. I was answering the phone, checking ID at the door, what have you. And my responsibility that day was also bringing those parcels to the post office. And so I remember thinking, I don't remember exactly what time. It was around 1:30 p.m. after lunch. Okay, there's a bunch of parcels on the desk. I do need to make that deadline at the post office. I should probably go to the post office pretty soon. Oh, you know what? I'll do this other task first, and then maybe there'll be another parcel or two so I can get it out. So it's like next day delivery. And then maybe a few minutes later, I remember thinking like, okay, I'm going to go soon. And then a few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. We kept the business locked, and we had, members. People had to sign up, get approval from their doctor. We printed them out, effectively an ID card. We saw that ID, corroborated it with the number in the computer system at the door, and only then would we unlock the door and let the patient in. So there was a knock at the door. Went to the front, and I see a police officer standing there. Now, this particular police officer had become a bit like friendly with the owner, and he had come in a few times. They had said hello. They had, checked the scene in the name of like, we're here for the safety of the community. We've heard you guys are doing good things, and we just want to know what's going on behind the closed doors. And so I saw this cop, and I like put up my finger. I said, 1 second, and I went and got the boss. And the boss came around the corner and said, "Oh, that's Sergeant, whatever. I don't remember his name, but that's Sergeant, sure. He's a friend of ours," and unlocked the door. And then this cop walked in, literally flanked by 11 or 12 other police officers, no guns drawn, but all wearing, bulletproof vests. And they all walked in together. And I remember like being very confused, like simultaneously confused, but obviously very well aware of what was going on. Like my heart dropped, my that lump in my throat, my heart's beating really fast. And very quickly, it was just myself, the owner, and the store, and the manager at the time. Very quickly, it was hands on the counter. They had a video camera out in our faces. And I found myself in this situation that I never once thought I would ever experience. All the details of what happened thereafter are like a little bit foggy, a little bit sketchy, but I remember the manager needed to use the washroom, and I was like, you know what? I also have to pee. And a cop stood off to the side and basically watched me pee. I think the worry was that I was going to flush some contraband or narcotics or something like that.
That classic flushing of weed down the toilet, just bricks and bricks of it down the toilet.
Bricks. Meanwhile, we had seedlings in the back. We had, a freezer and a fridge full of edibles and a safe full of cannabis and all this stuff. And then I do remember them wanting to handcuff us behind the back, and me, saying like, hold 1 second. I don't know if this is worth me saying, but like I'm a pacifist. I am not a flight risk. I'm not going to fight you. I am fully accepting of what is happening right now. If you have to handcuff me, can you handcuff me in front of my person? I really feel very uncomfortable handcuffing me behind. And the guy was like, "Nope, this is policy. Handcuffs behind the back." They ended up walking us down the street. They parked the van where they were loading us in, like well down the street. And we now think it was for good measure. It was showing the public, what they were doing, that they, the hand of the law is.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
there was a stolen car in my street just this week. 4 police cars turned up to deal with it, and they just park wherever they want. Yep. So when they feel like it, they will just park wherever they want. On that day, they were being purposeful, weren't they?
Exactly. They knew there was intention, right, to walk us. They could have literally walked us the 20 feet from the front door to the street, and yet I walked, 400 meters down to where the paddy wagon, to where the van was parked. Got down to the cop shop. They asked us a bunch of questions, took us up into separate rooms. He basically told me, the one police officer who was talking to me told me that I was, based on the charges, I was going to get out within an hour. So I, went to the holding cell, thinking I was going to get out in an hour. And then he came about 45 minutes later and said, "Oh, we didn't realize you also had seedlings in the back. So you're also being charged with production for the purpose of trafficking, in addition to the, I think, 3 counts of trafficking that I was charged with, in addition to the possession for the purpose of trafficking that I was charged with. So now we're also charged with production for the purpose, which is a much bigger offense." And he effectively said, I was mistaken. You are now going to be spending the night at least. And with that said, and he's standing like literally in the gate, in the door of my cell, saying, and with that said, you have the right to an attorney. You have the right to remain silent. Like he starts reading me my rights from scratch again. And I'm just sitting there with like my jaw wide open, like, what is happening in my life right now? It was scary.
It's the worst episode of Law and Order
Ever, dude, ever.
So obviously that was a pretty full-on experience for you to go through that. How did you then kind of have the bravery to continue on, to carry on and go, yeah, I'm going to stick with this market? Because I'm sure for a lot of people that would be the end of it. Just like, look, I got arrested. I don't want to be associated with that anymore. How did you carry on?
Yeah, I love the way that you frame that, because the truthful answer is that I did not. I got out the next day, on my part of my probation. I wasn't allowed to interact with my co-accused, and I wasn't allowed to possess, and a bunch of other levels of the recognizance. So the long story short is I went home and I packed up all of my paraphernalia. I packed up all my bongs. I packed up all my pipes. I had, a box of random cannabis and edibles and whatever else. And I brought it to a friend's house that had no problem with it. And I stashed it in his basement and his garage. I don't remember exactly, but I got it out of my house. I was worried. I had this fear that this, the cops were going to come back and that I was going to get in trouble for breaking my bail conditions and whatnot. So I actually got out of cannabis. They successfully at the time scared me out of this scared me out of the medical industry. I ended up going back to school for renewable energy. I went to college for, renewable energy design and building technology. I ended up getting a job a few years later installing and then designing solar panel systems, residential rooftop solar systems. And I did that for over 3 years or so. And then I moved out west with my partner, my wife now. I moved out west from Ontario to British Columbia. That's when, the cannabis light shined on me once again. The scene, as you well know, in BC was very different. This is even before legalization, and yet provincially mandated municipalities in BC could do what they want. They could legalize or allow businesses to operate under the medical model, depending on what that municipality wanted. So the province, designed that, and we landed in Vancouver, and there were a bunch of pot shops, a bunch of these dispensaries in operation. Pretty much all of them, if I'm not mistaken at the time, you did have to sign a form that you were using for medical reasons. You had to sign off that this was a medical therapeutic approach. You even had to, I think, write down your diagnosis or at least the symptoms that you were trying to treat. But with that said, this was operating in the full view of the law on every city corner. So that was what kind of brought me back in. And I was like, what, I have this experience. I restarted consuming as well over the years. I got back into the culture. I didn't work in it, but I got back into the culture for my own consumption and my own social purposes. And then I became a bud tender in this, not federally legal, not nationally legal, but provincially mandated program. So I got a job. I got working as a bud tender, talking about medical consultation. Very quickly, I moved into a role as assistant manager at the shop, again, before legalization. That store closed down before legalization. And, then I moved into the licensed producer work and sales work and whatnot. But the long-winded answer to your question is they scared me out. I never originally thought that I was getting into it to be an activist. I never wanted to put myself or my family at risk. I had other plans for my future that didn't involve cannabis activism and flirting with the law and maybe getting arrested again. Some of my, one of my co-accused ended up getting back in and ended up doing a stint because of some other unrelated, work and whatnot that he was doing. So anyways, the long and short of it is they fully scared me out. They kind of won that round and scared me out of the business.
Well, quite a bit of time has passed since then to where you're at now. And I don't want to gloss over the amazing journey you've had through the legacy market into the legal, where you've worked for a couple of different brands, but the majority of your work in the legal market has now been for Quest and the umbrella company Decibel. Let's talk about Quest a little bit, because Quest is a brand that I really loved while I was in Canada, one that I really stood for, and one that I really enjoyed selling because of the high quality and the appreciation for genetics. So explain to the listener, what is Quest? What are they about?
Yeah. So you said it. So Decibel is the LP, the licensed producer. We've got a few brands. General Admission is one of our brands. And yes, we're probably best known, well known, at least until General Admission has become like the number one vape brand in the country. We're very well known for Quest. So Quest, the birth of the name is quintessentially West. This is honoring, our spiritual home of BC Bud, let's call it. A big component of the brand itself was unique, breeder source genetics, showcasing these beautiful and rare genetics that are not necessarily available widely in the legal market, and now bringing them to the market. The elevator pitch of the process, so to speak, is small batch, hang dried, hand trimmed, and only the choice nugs, the choice cuts are put in the jar. So a big element of it, of course, is the genetics, the small batch approach, and then a few other elements. And one that's very important to me is we don't spray any chemicals or pesticides. It's entirely biologic predatory pest control. So for the simple element of this story, think like releasing some ladybugs if there's an aphid issue developing. So it's biologic predatory pest control, no chemicals or anything like that. And this is considered craft premium cannabis. And I will also finish this part of the story by telling you that we've come a long way. There were some killer products when you were around, not going to shy away. There were a few flops here and there, a few products that were lacking terpene content and aroma and didn't burn as cleanly and as amazingly as we wanted. But the team has put in a lot of hard work. We've redesigned or upgraded at least our facilities, dialed in some of the processes, gone to this approach of tissue culture for propagating our mother stock. And the two latest drops, and my friend, I wish you were here to see them, but our two latest drops are absolutely killer. Like the aroma just bounces right out of the jar. The smoke is clean and smooth. Yeah, buddy, we've come a whole long way, and I wish I could spark one up with you right now.
Look, I'm incredibly envious of what you guys have. What are those new products? What are they?
Yeah, brother. So the two main new flower drops that I'm really excited about. We've got Terpy Slurpy, nice indica leaning cultivar. It's GMO crossed with orange Skittles. It's this beautiful, like sweet orange citrus, but like just this barreling gas diesel that comes through as well. I love, that combination of like orange and gas really works for me. I'm a big fan of it. Just delightful. Honestly, my mouth is watering just thinking about it right now. And then the other drop that we've got, we're calling by the lineage that it is, which is sour strawberry crossed with trophy wife. This is sativa leaning. It's got this beautiful, like sweet strawberry, citrus, like spicy herb component to the aroma and the flavor profile. It's for me a lot more like a bit more uplifting and like happy and energizing than the Terpy Slurpy might be. Both of them are just delicious. I'm a sucker for, yes, of course, I love the effect of cannabis, but I'm a sucker for like the journey, the ceremony, the ritual, and I really enjoy the smell, and I like grinding, and then I like the dry pull. We have a mutual friend who's all about the dry pull, and I've always been about the dry pull. This is the best way to really identify like the flavor and how it's going to taste. Because for me, at least, especially talking about combusting joints, as soon as you spark it, often for me, I lose that flavor pretty quickly. Now it's like, okay, the taste of smoke. But both of these on the dry pull, again, like orange and gas on the Terpy Slurpy, and like strawberry citrus herbs on the sour strawberry trophy wife. Both are just delightful.
I swear that I get a contact high just from hearing you talk about these so passionately.
Thank you, brother. I'm doing a good job then. Thank you.
Absolutely. You mentioned tissue culture. I don't know what that is. What is tissue culture?
Tissue culture is basically starting, with the most sterile component in a lab, effectively in a sterile lab. So we, I'm not going to get into all the science, and I'm sure some of it is very detailed and way above my head. But basically what we're doing is we are propagating, restarting some of our mothers, which we then take seedlings from in order to grow into plants, in order to grow flour from, in order to harvest, and then we smoke it. But we are restarting our mothers using this sterile lab approach, where we're literally taking cells and culturing them in a petri dish and growing a little seedling out of this petri dish and growing that into a nice, strong, active mother plant that then we take our seedlings from. The long and short of it, the whole purpose behind it is to really regenerate your genetics. It's effectively to start from this absolutely, literal, sterile, clean source that you can then grow the rest of your plants from. And it's led to, stronger, vigorous, more robust crops with greater yield and honestly, just a better output, a much better, higher quality output than we've ever had before.
There's incredible vision at Decibel and subsequently Quest. Like, I continue to be impressed by the lack of resting on laurels. It's never like, okay, cool, we've reached the mountaintop with this. These products sell, these 32% indica, great, we're done. I continue to see new products, new approaches, and that is incredibly visionary. And no bullshit, anyone can talk about a brand, anyone can create a story and a buzz and a vibe, but Quest do really have something special. They've had something special since day one, and they see an obligation to continue to refine that and continue to be leaders without the ego. Like, I'm so impressed by everything that Quest does and Decibel and the people like you that are attached to it.
That's amazing, man. I appreciate you saying that, because I think that there's something really beautiful and a lot of integrity that goes into the work that a lot of the good people are doing behind the scenes. And, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I'm more of like a public figure in the company. Obviously, I'm talking out loud to bud tenders and retailers, and we have hundreds of people behind the scenes that are doing this work in the labs, growing our flower in our cultivation facilities, processing it, trimming it, packaging it, like all the work that goes on behind the scenes. And I love that we are not shying away from these challenges, even within, and we're transparent about it. We had some harvests that were lacking in a bunch of the qualities that we would associate with craft premium high quality cannabis. And yet, because of the people, because of the integrity, the willingness to admit, that it wasn't all it could be and that we're going to fix it for next time. It really, you can probably tell by the way I talk about it. Like, I believe in it. I'm one person that, I'm not going to, and I've done it before, but I don't want to be employed. I don't want to devote my passion and energy and time to something that I don't believe in. And so I feel like I've been around for a while, in this industry and in this company now. And I've seen the hard work and the integrity that goes into, here and there admitting defeat, but here and there showcasing some absolutely immaculate work that was done behind the scenes. So really proud of our people, proud of the company. And I believe in it, my friend. I'm here for the long run.
I've got a couple of questions here from our mutual friend Zane Yassine, who was my guest on the previous episode, and they are pertinent to your work in Decibel and also your cross-country move. So I've got two questions. I'll lead with the first one. Given your experience in BC and now Ontario, what are the key differences between the two markets, specifically with retailers and customers?
Wow, what a big question. So BC, I want to say it used to be that BC, and it probably still is to some extent, has a much higher standard for, craft quality cannabis. The bud tenders there are more well versed, or have been, in my experience. Obviously, I was living in BC for a while, so this was my most familiarity. But we're very big on themselves consuming and very aware of the newest and closest and local craft producer and the newest drops and all that. So a very high standard of appreciation for high quality cannabis. Whereas, at least in the past, my experience was that Ontario, didn't have the same legacy access before legalization. So we're a little bit more open to whatever's available and we'll take it all, and didn't have as high of a standard. I will be honest now, and I've only been in Ontario, returned to Ontario for just over a month, but from the interactions that I have, that's not the case anymore. Ontario bud tenders are particularly well versed and do have a very I say it with an air of appreciation, a snobby nose when we're talking about, high quality cannabis. I love it. A lot of people here know what the hell they're talking about. Most people do. And they appreciate high quality plants, high quality flower. Ask me again in a little while. For now, it only being a month, I'd say the assumptions that I had about the Ontario market are probably not as accurate as I thought they were, and that across this frickin' country, 4 years into legalization. By the way, happy 4 years. That just happened a couple of weeks ago now. The appreciation for quality cannabis is alive and well, and LPs out there, myself, my the company that I'm employed by included, don't take it lightly. You have to every single day come through, impress bud tenders, impress consumers, because people across this country know how to analyze flower and they know what they like.
That's so great to hear that kind of the culture is building, the legal culture, because so often there's criticisms of legalization based on the existing culture. You've seen that Ontario didn't necessarily have the baseline, but have still embraced it just as much as anyone else have. And that's really, really exciting. Time will tell kind of if the differences continue. But one of the things that stood out, I had Adolfo Gonzalez on the show recently, and a few years ago, I did his cannabis sommelier course. At that time, he was highly critical of the products that were on the legal market, huge issues with dryness, humidity, quality, use-by dates, all that stuff. And really, it's only taken a few years for every LP to have to kind of take note of what people want. Even in some of those value brands or budget brands, so to speak, people still want that same quality. They still expect terpene profiles and real flavor and real quality. So I think it's fantastic for the culture that people want good stuff.
100%. And I appreciate you bringing a few people's names, to the forefront of this conversation. Shouts out to Zane. I've known him as well for a few years, and him and I have worked together in the past, just in similar situations, and we've met out in the field quite a lot, and have always got along. And I really am inspired by Zane and everything that he's doing with his organization and with his brands and everything like that. And then of course I can't not shout out Mr. Adolfo Gonzalez. We've worked together quite a bit. I worked for Canna Reps for a few weeks, in fact, as a copywriter, before I ended up getting a job with a licensed producer, formerly to my current employment. But I've taken both level 1 and level 2 sommelier courses. Before legalization, I took their therapeutic cannabis guidance course, which I consider one of my main, foundational pieces to being able to talk the talk that I do today. So a lot of good mentors in this business, in this industry. And to reiterate exactly what the point that you just made, 4 years in, it is a whole different environment. I'm picturing 4 years ago and everyone being hypercritical of the shitty packaging and like the lack of information on the labels. And honestly, at the time, it was a little short, low THC potency, and lack of terpene content, and honestly, lack of transparency about the terpene content itself, whatever the case may be. And every few months, every year, it's clear that like development is happening, things are changing. And now 4 years later, it's a whole other world. Like, you can easily spend a lot of money just getting every single day new drops that are absolutely blowing it out of the water from the previous harvest. It's taking its toll on, a lot of people's bank accounts, but in a positive way. There's a lot of good shit out there right now, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, the next question coming from Zane really focuses on your role in education at Decibel, and that is, your role and Decibel's approach to learning and education is unique in the industry. Why is it important that more companies invest in training and education?
Oh, I love it. I think it's at the end of the day, that's the main foundation of it all. For anyone that's going out there as a salesperson, I don't want to I feel like we've talked about this. We gave the concept of like quote unquote bad reps, a little bit of attention earlier. If you bud tenders, retailers can kind of see through that, and you have to know what you're talking about. We are at the forefront of this industry, and I want to articulate it similarly to like high level love of wine and the sommelier kind of approach, where there's something really beautiful about understanding the product that you're consuming, knowing the story behind it, and being able to talk about it. So I think there's a few levels to it. I'm a sucker for the story. I love a good recommendation, and if someone can tell me some of the technical, details behind the product, I'm more likely to be interested in trying that product. So I think, just the general level of knowledge is very important for, I don't want to say convincing people to try a product, but for telling the proper story and highlighting the important details of that particular product. But I also think there's an element of knowledge and education and training for continuing to reduce the stigma. There's an element of this legalized industry where it's become clear that a lot more people consume cannabis than we thought. It's not just 19 to 24-year-olds that consume cannabis on a regular basis. There's a lot of very important, upstanding members of our society, professionals, people that you wouldn't necessarily have assumed to smoke cannabis back in the day. I put that in quotes. You couldn't see it, but I put it in quotes. Whereas, I feel this duty. I think, and I don't know, I can feel it from you too, hosting this podcast, telling the stories, talking about your own personal experiences as you so transparently have, with making this plant more accessible, and even just the understanding of it more accessible. There's a lot of great people that use it for their own purposes. We are in the recreational market, so I'm not really supposed to talk about the therapeutic benefits as much as I would like to. There are ways to work around that. But with that said, again, education, knowledge, it's empowering. It is empowering. Knowledge is truly power. And I think that as much as possible, I'm going to continue to shout that from the rooftops.
And I'm so glad people like you do that, because I think that anyone who has found a functional use for cannabis, I used to kind of say anyone that uses cannabis, I've kind of reframed it to anyone that has found a functional use for cannabis or found a healthy place in their life, has a bit of an obligation and a responsibility to share those benefits with other people, because that is the only way we're going to get to any sense of normalcy, any sense of normalization and destigmatization, is if the people that are actually doing it share those stories. And then the second layer is, I actually want to hear from people that don't do it, that still support it. I want to hear from those scientists, those researchers, those doctors who believe in it and understand that while it may not be for everyone and it's not a panacea, there is still merit to it. So I think a lot of cannabis users want other cannabis users to share those stories, but we also need to find those allies that go, hey, I don't need to use this to understand that it's fine.
Oh, I love that category of folks, right? The people who have for one reason or another don't want to do it. Maybe they've tried and it doesn't, again, we've talked about this. This is how we started the conversation, but for one reason, they're allergic. It doesn't work for them, whatever the case may be, but that they still support, other people's use. Maybe they have a grandmother that used it for her purposes, and they saw the miracle that it can do for them. I also want to plant the seed to you, my friend, that there's another category of people that I want to hear from. I don't interact with them very much. It's just my day-to-day and how I spend my time as an employee of a licensed cannabis producer. But I'm curious to hear about people that are like 4 years in, still anti-legalization,
yes,
anti-cannabis. Like, why the hell are they anti-cannabis? Again, maybe they had, and you said, right, like responsible use. Maybe they have someone, maybe it's them personally, or they have someone in their family who went down a bad place, with addiction and mental health and whatnot, because that's a thing that we can talk about too, right? Cannabis is not for everybody. There are a lot of people that have struggled with overconsumption, for not respecting the plant, for not using it responsibly, for one reason or another. Maybe it's to within their control or not within their control. But I'm also curious to hear from people that are anti. I want to know what's up for them.
This is an open call out to anyone that is anti-cannabis. I'd love to have those conversations. And that's the thing, like, we are here willing to have those conversations. I would literally even shut up and not retort back at a single thing, even if I thought it was absurd. I'd love to hear some good, reasonable arguments. Let's stay on the lookout for some of those opponents who are willing to have a reasonable conversation, because you and I are both up for it.
100%. I will take that challenge with you, brother.
Well, I want to put you on the hot seat a little bit. I've got a bit of a rapid fire quiz. How do you feel about that?
I'm into it. Let's do it.
Best thing about the cannabis industry?
The people.
Worst thing about the cannabis industry?
People who claim that THC is everything.
Indica, sativa, or hybrid?
Ooh, it really depends on the product. It depends on the day. Generally, likely in that like sativa leaning, but end of the day, indica leaning for sure.
Oh, very diplomatic.
So diplomatic.
Flower or edibles? I think you've answered this one.
Yeah, I do love my edibles, but flower for sure.
In regards to rap music, East Coast or West Coast?
I think overall West Coast, but like like Mos Def, Talib Kweli, out of Brooklyn. I have a hard time. I got to be diplomatic about this one too, dude. Both, but maybe a little bit more on the West Coast.
Favorite place to consume?
Yeah, this is gonna be like in a private, sunny backyard. Maybe it's on a beautiful spot looking out over like a river with trees behind me. But I would argue mostly by myself. I think I prefer to consume on my own, or maybe with like one or two close people.
Well, as we get to the pointy end of this conversation, there's something I want to circle back to because it's come up a couple of times, and that's this notion of THC percentage. We have alluded to it already. We've spoken about it. I guess I want to know, why are people so attached to this? And more importantly, what should people be looking for instead? There isn't the big jar of weed they can smell. They can't necessarily look at it and have that tactile experience as much as they used to. What should people be looking for?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. It makes me think of, back in the day when I was bud tending before the legal industry in the legacy market, we call it, when someone would come in and they would give us a sample and say, hey, we've got, a few pounds that you can put on your menu and sell. And they would tell us, this is the strain, this is how it was grown, and this is the THC potency. Now, I will argue with you that most of the time they did not do a proper lab test. So this was just like a potency that maybe they pulled out, maybe they could assume, you know what I mean? And so they'd say, oh, it's 28% THC, and we would then therefore translate that into a higher price point on the menu because of a higher potency. This was so, I'll use the term archaic, this is so old fashioned. Now we do have lab reports and lab results, but based on those, and I'd almost rather say it from my own personal view, from my own personal experimentation, that 31% THC product doesn't necessarily, in fact, often doesn't do more for me than a low 20% THC potency. And part of that, I find there's this like perfect balance that a lot of cultivation, specialists are trying to find. And it's this balance between potency, THC that is, terpene content, and like the yield, as in how many pounds, how many kilos are we growing? And they don't always max out at the same place. Sometimes you'll get a higher potency, and that'll then compromise the terpene content or the yield, or vice versa. So, a lot of the time that higher 31% THC usually does have a lower terpene content. Now, again, I'm kind of coming around circle, but I know that a lot of people aren't able to necessarily smell the product before they buy it. Usually we cannot in this legal market. So, we're going a little bit based on those results. And again, this assumption, and it was weird in the early days of legalization, people would come into most stores and say, like, what is the highest potency? And that was the first question, assuming whether this was accurate for them or not, but maybe it's this misconception, assuming that a higher potency will translate into a more positive effect, even if that more positive effect that they're looking for is greater intoxication. I don't want to like downplay the fact that like I got to respect every consumer and them thinking they know what it is that they are looking for, what they want. I don't want to like disregard that, because some people, that may be accurate and that may be what they need and what they want. But with that said, I really want to challenge people to not assume that a high THC potency is going to give them a better effect. I can speak as someone from, with personal experience, and I think I can talk to you, Paul, and assume that you have a very similar level of experience. And the vast majority of my colleagues and friends who are regular consumers, a higher THC potency does not translate into a more positive effect. So all I want to do is just like challenge that notion. Maybe the same as your medical you're someone who's brand new, who's maybe consuming for medical purposes. I talked about journal, keep a journal, talk about what you're looking for, what it did. If you're an experienced consumer, test it out, grab a 17%, maybe it's got a 1.5% terpene content, maybe it's got a 4% terpene content, and try that one day. Try to, make all the factors the same the next day, which is nearly impossible. How much did you eat? How much did you sleep? How much water did you drink? How stressed are you from work work that day. What, these are all factors that will play into the outcome of your experience. But I still want to challenge them to like really dig down and deep and understand, analyze, observe what that potency does for them. And again, just from my own experience, generally that 30% THC does not do the trick for me.
Great answer. And littered throughout this episode, you have kind of really alluded to those things people should be looking for. What is the story? Where has it come from? How was it grown? What are the inputs and things like that? There's so much more to what makes quality cannabis than just that THC number.
Yes, brother. Exactly. Again, I'm a sucker for that story. If you tell me the person's name who grew it and like what they had for breakfast before they came to work and like the song that they played on the way home, like all of those, I know it's not even relevant to the plant, to the actual product, but I'm an absolute sucker for the story. I'm obviously being a little bit, facetious here. And, I want to know more about the story about the actual plant and its cultivation practices. But again, man, I'm a sucker. Tell me the person's name who like trimmed it, who grew it. And that carries a lot of weight for me. As a regular consumer, that carries a lot of weight for me.
Well, as we're at the tail end, our final segment is called Polls of Wisdom. And this is where you drop a bit of a snappy, easy dinner party fact that could be given to someone to maybe change their mind about cannabis. Just drop a little bit of knowledge that they don't know already.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing. I'm starting to learn a lot more about the individual terpenes and what they do. So I've started to kind of understand what certain smells, what certain things are gonna do for me. So generally something that's a little bit gassier or has that kind of diesel piney aroma is going to be a little bit heavier for me. And for the layman out there, generally people are saying that's indica leaning. But for me, it's, a little bit of a heavier, end of the day variety. Something that might be a little bit more tropical and fruity is going to be a little bit more uplifting. But as I learn more and unpack the terpenes, it's such a cool thing to identify myrcene. Myrcene is one of it's a lot of people's favorite terpenes, but I really enjoy myrcene for a few reasons. It's primarily commonly found in mangoes. It's got that same like juicy stone fruit, almost skunkiness that, a mango might have. And then the really cool stat that I've learned is that myrcene actually makes THC more efficient. Myrcene decreases the work that THC does to get between the blood-brain barrier. So with that said, this might not be the thing that a brand new consumer wants to find if they want to find a lighter product. But for most consumers who are looking for that high THC potency, if you find something with a very high level of myrcene, if myrcene is the number one terpene, and if it's especially the number one terpene by a lot, there's a very good chance that that product is going to be very intoxicating for you, going to be very psychoactive for you. And then from my experience, and again, everybody is different. I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. Everybody is very different. But from my experience, something that's very high in myrcene is going to be a little bit more sleep inducing for me. It's going to be a little bit more relaxing and heavy of a particular product. I know it's not a hugely mind-blowing fact or anything like that, but as I unpack the terpenes and learn a little bit more about them, that's one that just continuously sticks out for the aroma and as well for the impact on my body.
I think Blue Dream can be a high myrcene one, and that's really an interesting hybrid as it's classified because the effects on people are so different. I would always say to people in the store, it'll either make you clean the house or go to sleep, or clean the house and go to sleep. Like there's three kind of options there, and it really depends on your endocannabinoid system. But that's definitely one where 14% THC could come through and it would still have a huge impact on me. I think some of the kind of cushes, I know Granddaddy Purple's high in myrcene. That's one that I find incredibly relaxing. So I think that's a great bit of advice, man.
And honestly, I love that you brought up Blue Dream. I know that for a lot of people, this is a very uplifting product. It is one of those for me where maybe like while I'm smoking it, I do like the taste of it on average. When I will argue that I've tried a few Blue Dreams that don't really carry a similar profile. There's a lot of Blue Dreams on the market. But for the ones that I found that are, Blue Dream proper or that I associate with being proper Blue Dream, I find it's very uplifting immediately. And then it does kind of make me quite yawn and sleepy as the duration passes. So yeah, that's a great product to call it for that purpose as well.
Well, an excellent poll of wisdom there. Look for higher myrcene ones. Those THC douches can just pull it back a little bit and look for a bit of myrcene.
Yeah, there you go. As simple as that, eh?
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today, man. It's just, I could talk to you forever about cannabis. And I really hope that the passion and enjoy and enthusiasm has come through to the listener, because it certainly has through this video with me. As we wrap up, where can our listeners find you on the internet?
I love it. You're welcome to find me on the Instagram. I do play the Instagram game sometimes. Quest.eitan.can. So that's Quest, QWEST.EITAN, which is my given name, .can, CANN. That's probably the most accessible place to find me on the interweb. I try to approach, Instagram, like most things in my life, with a bit of balance. I'm not on it all the time. I generally am not on it on the weekends, so don't expect an immediate reply, but I do encourage anyone, you're welcome to reach out, holler, share some love, share some feedback, whatever you want to do. But Paul, this is always a pleasure, man. I appreciate you so much, not just in this industry and in this I always say industry, in this community. I really appreciate you in this community, and even more so, way past that, way past the love of the plant. I've always I've always really liked you. I don't want to like shy away from the fact that I got a lot of love for you, my friend. But when, that I remember the day that you left, and I felt pretty sad about it. And I'm really grateful for any of these opportunities to reconnect and to chat and to share a little bit of love of the plant or otherwise. So wherever you are in the world, I think 13 hours ahead of me right now, or I'm 13 hours behind you. I got you, buddy. Holler at me if you need anything at all. I consider you a really, really good friend.
So much love. I appreciate you so much. It's like having a brother across the world, and this will not be the last time that our listeners hear from you. So thank you so much for your time, your passion, your energy, your love for the plant, and just being a great dude, man. Much love.
Oh, you're the best, Paul. Keep up the good work, eh, buddy? I can't wait to hear all these episodes and more.
Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations is written and produced by me, Paul. Music written and produced by Big Mike. Follow us on Instagram at Give and Toke, or get in touch by emailing giveandtoke@gmail.com. You'll also find us on Twitter and Facebook. All opinions expressed by program guests are solely their current opinions and do not necessarily reflect the position of Give and Toke. Content discussed in this show does not constitute medical advice. Cannabis is not legal everywhere, so please be aware of your local laws.